The sound of a gunshot echoed through the valley as Daisy Larson clutched her 6-month-old son tighter to her chest, tears streaming down her dirt-smudged face. Colorado Territory, 1876, a place where survival demanded grit, and for a woman alone, it demanded miracles. "Hush now, Samuel," she whispered, rocking the fussing infant as she peered through the broken window of her small homestead cabin. Outside, 3 riders circled like vultures, their intentions clear as the mountain sky. They'd come for what little she had left. "We know you're in there, Mrs. Larson," a gravelly voice called out. "Your husband's debt don't die with him. Come on out and we can discuss terms." Daisy's throat tightened. Robert had been gone for 2 months now, taken by a fever that swept through the mining camps. She hadn't known about his gambling debts until these men showed up last week. Now they were back, and she had nothing to give them. Samuel whimpered against her shoulder as she backed away from the window. The barn. If she could reach the barn, she might escape through the back and make it to town. It was 5 miles, but desperation made for strong legs. Clutching her son with one arm and a small sack of provisions with the other, Daisy slipped out the back door. The late afternoon sun cast long shadows as she crouched low, making her way toward the small barn. Just 20 more steps. The click of a hammer being pulled back froze her in place. "Going somewhere, Mrs. Larson?" Daisy turned slowly. The man was tall, his face shadowed by a worn hat. Behind him, his companions approached on horseback. "Please," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "I have nothing of value." "Just let us go." The leader dismounted, striding toward her with purpose. "That land you're standing on is plenty valuable. Sign it over and we'll call it square." "This land is all I have left to feed my son," Daisy said, her voice finding strength in maternal protection. "You can't take it." The man reached for his gun. "I don't think you understand the situation." The sharp crack of a rifle shot cut through the air. The man froze, then slowly raised his hands. "I believe the lady said no." The voice came from behind the barn. A tall figure emerged, rifle raised, steady in his hands. The setting sun caught the silver star pinned to his vest. "Marshal Jenkins," the debt collector spat. "This ain't your business. Threatening a woman and child on their own property, that's exactly my business." The marshal's voice was calm but carried an edge of steel. "Mount up and ride out." "Now?" The 3 men exchanged glances, but something in the marshal's stance made it clear this wasn't a negotiation. They mounted up, the leader giving one last threatening glance before they galloped away. Only when the dust from their horses had settled did Daisy's legs give out. She sank to her knees, still clutching Samuel, who had miraculously fallen asleep despite the commotion. The marshal approached, lowering his rifle. "Madam, are you hurt?" Daisy shook her head, finally looking up at her rescuer. He wasn't what she expected. Younger than she'd thought, maybe 30, with kind eyes that contrasted with the hard lines of his sun-weathered face. "I'm Marshal Jake Bennett," he said, offering his hand. "Folks call me Jake." "Daisy Larson," she replied, taking his hand with her free one. "And this is Samuel." Jake looked at the sleeping infant, then surveyed the small homestead, the broken fence, the untended fields, the leaking roof of the cabin. "You're out here alone?" he asked, though it seemed he already knew the answer. "My husband died 2 months ago. Mining accident, fever took him." Daisy got to her feet, squaring her shoulders with what dignity she could muster. "I'm managing." Jake's expression suggested he thought otherwise, but he was too polite to say so. "Those men might come back," he said instead. "Mind if I look around, make sure everything's secure?" Daisy hesitated. A strange man, even one with a badge, wasn't someone she'd normally welcome. But the alternative was facing those debt collectors alone. "That would be kind of you, Marshal." Jake spent the next hour checking the property, fixing the broken window, and reinforcing the door. Daisy put Samuel down in his cradle and prepared a simple meal, the least she could offer for his help. "How long have you been the marshal in these parts?" she asked as they sat at her small table, eating beans and cornbread. "Just 6 months, Jake said. Was a Texas Ranger before that. Decided I wanted somewhere a bit quieter." Daisy couldn't help a small laugh. And how's that working out for you? His smile reached his eyes, creating small crinkles at the corners. Well, madam, I didn't say I wanted boring. As dusk settled, Jake prepared to leave. I'll be back tomorrow to check on you, he said, adjusting his hat. Those men shouldn't bother you again, but better safe than sorry. True to his word, Jake returned the next day and the day after that. Each visit, he'd bring something supplies from town, tools for repairs, once even a small toy for Samuel. He'd work on the homestead, fixing what needed fixing, while Daisy tended to her daily chores. They fell into a comfortable routine. Jake would come by after his rounds, stay until evening, sometimes staying for supper. They'd talk about everything and nothing: his past adventures as a ranger, her life before coming west, books they'd read, dreams they'd had a month passed this way. The homestead began to look less neglected, and Daisy found herself watching the road each afternoon, anticipating Jake's arrival. One evening, as they sat on the porch watching the sunset, Samuel asleep inside, Jake cleared his throat. "Mrs. Larson, Daisy," he began, uncharacteristically hesitant. "I've been thinking. A dangerous pastime," she teased gently. He smiled but continued seriously. "Those men, the debt collectors, they'll likely be back once they think I've forgotten about you." Daisy's smile faded. "I know, you can't fight them off alone, and winter's coming, this place." He gestured to the homestead. "It's too much for one person to manage, especially with a little one." "What are you suggesting, Marshal?" Daisy asked, a slight edge to her voice. She'd had enough of men telling her what she couldn't do. Jake looked at her directly. "I'm suggesting you consider selling this place, moving into town. There's a small house next to the marshal's office. It's not much, but it's sturdy and you'd be safer there." Daisy stood abruptly. "This land is Samuel's inheritance. It's all he has left of his father. I won't sell it." "Daisy, thank you for your concern, Marshal Bennett, but we'll manage." Her tone was final. Jake nodded, respecting her decision even if he disagreed. He left shortly after, the evening ending on a tense note for the first time since they'd met. That night Daisy lay awake, Samuel sleeping beside her. Was she being stubborn? Perhaps. But this land represented everything she and Robert had dreamed of. Giving up felt like another kind of death. The next day Jake didn't come, nor the day after. By the third day, Daisy found herself watching the road with a hollow feeling in her chest. She missed him. More than she wanted to admit. On the fourth day, as dusk approached, Daisy heard hoofbeats. Her heart lifted, then immediately sank when she saw not one rider but three. The debt collectors had returned. She quickly placed Samuel in his cradle and grabbed Robert's old shotgun from above the door. She'd never fired it, but they didn't need to know that. "Mrs. Larson," the leader called out as they dismounted. "Time to finish our business." Daisy stepped onto the porch, shotgun raised. "I told you before, this land isn't for sale." The men laughed, clearly unintimidated by her stance. "Your Marshal friend isn't around to save you this time. We checked. He's a good 2 days' ride away, handling some trouble in the next county." Daisy's grip on the shotgun tightened. They'd been watching, waiting for Jake to leave. "Last chance," the leader said, his hand resting on his holstered gun. "Sign the deed over or we'll take it anyway, and trust me, you don't want us to do it the hard way." Inside, Samuel began to cry as if sensing the danger. The sound seemed to change something in the men's expressions, a hardening, a loss of whatever small mercy they might have had. "You hear that?" Daisy said, her voice steady despite her racing heart. "That's my son. This land is his future. I won't let you take it." "A kid needs his mama," one of the men said, his tone ominous. "Be a shame if something happened to you." The sound of a rifle being cocked cut through the tension. "I'd reconsider that threat if I were you." Jake emerged from the tree line, rifle aimed, his horse nowhere in sight. He must have approached on foot, anticipating trouble. The men spun around, reaching for their weapons. "I thought you was gone," the leader snarled. "Clearly," Jake replied, advancing steadily. "Now we can do this civilized, or we can do it the other way. Your choice." For a moment it seemed the men would choose violence. Then, calculating the odds, the leader slowly raised his hands. "This ain't over," he warned. Actually, it is, Jake said. See, I took the liberty of sending a telegraph to the territorial judge about your operation. Turns out, forcing widows off their land by claiming false debts is frowned upon. There's a U.S. Marshal and a posse heading this way right now to have a word with you gentlemen. The men's faces paled. You're lying, the leader said, but his voice lacked conviction. As if on cue, the sound of multiple riders approaching echoed from down the road. Am I? Jake asked. What followed was a brief but intense standoff, ending with the debt collectors in handcuffs being led away by the U.S. Marshal and his deputies. Jake had indeed sent for help, foreseeing the men would make their move when they thought him gone. As the dust settled and the posse disappeared down the road with their prisoners, Daisy found herself alone with Jake once more. Samuel had quieted, now gurgling happily in her arms as if nothing had happened. You knew they'd come, she said, not a question. Jake nodded, holstering his gun. Spotted them watching the road yesterday. Figured they were waiting for me to leave, so you pretended to. Set a trap of sorts, he admitted, though I would have preferred if you'd been in town safe. Daisy studied him, this man who'd risked himself for her and Samuel repeatedly. Why do you care so much, Jake, about us, this place? Jake looked away, suddenly finding his boots fascinating. When I first came to this territory, I was running from something. Not the law, he added quickly, but myself, maybe. Lost my wife and daughter to cholera 3 years ago, couldn't bear to stay in the house we'd built together. Daisy's heart ached for him. I'm so sorry. He nodded, acknowledging her sympathy. When I saw you that first day, holding your boy, standing your ground despite everything, it reminded me there's still courage in this world, still things worth fighting for. The honesty in his words touched something deep in Daisy. For the first time since Robert died, she felt less alone. Thank you, she said simply, for fighting for us. That night, Jake stayed in the barn, unwilling to leave them unprotected, though the danger had passed. The next morning brought heavy clouds and the promise of the first snow. Daisy watched from the kitchen window as Jake chopped wood, building up their supply for the coming winter. Samuel sat in his basket nearby, captivated by the rhythmic motion of the axe. The reality of their situation was becoming clearer with each passing day. Winter in the Colorado Territory was brutal. Game would become scarce, travel nearly impossible. Even with Jake's help preparing, she wasn't sure she and Samuel would survive alone. When Jake came in for coffee, his breath visible in the cold air, Daisy had made her decision. I've been thinking about your offer, she said, about moving to town. Jake set down his coffee cup. It's still open, that house is empty. Daisy took a deep breath. But I won't sell this land, it's Samuel's birthright. I understand, Jake said, though disappointment flickered across his face. However, she continued, I was thinking we might lease it. Find someone to work it through the winter until Samuel and I can return in the spring. Jake's expression brightened. That's a fine idea. I know a family just arrived from back east. Good people looking for land to farm. They could care for the place, give you a portion of whatever they produce. Would they agree to such terms? I believe they would. Jake hesitated, then added softly, Daisy, there's something else I should tell you. She waited, sensing his struggle. I've come to care for you and Samuel, more than I thought possible. I know it's too soon, and I'm not asking for anything now, but I wanted you to know. The confession hung between them, honest and vulnerable. Daisy's heart raced. She'd felt it too, the growing connection, the comfort of his presence, the way Samuel smiled whenever Jake entered the room. It's not too soon to care, she said finally. Life out here is too uncertain for such luxuries as proper timing. A tentative smile spread across Jake's face. Does that mean you might consider? Well, that you might feel similarly. Daisy couldn't help but smile in return. I'm considering it very seriously, Marshal Bennett. The first snowflakes began to fall as they made preparations to move to town. The family Jake had mentioned, the Petersons, were indeed eager for the arrangement, promising to care for the homestead through the winter. The small house beside the marshal's office was simple but sound, with 2 rooms and a small kitchen. Jake helped Daisy and Samuel settle in, bringing furniture from the homestead and additional items from town. As winter deepened, so did their relationship. Jake would come for dinner most evenings, sometimes bringing along Mrs. Peterson's fresh bread or preserves. He'd sit by the fire, telling Samuel stories while Daisy sewed or prepared meals. Sometimes they'd just talk, learning the contours of each other's hearts in the soft lamplight. By Christmas, the whole town knew there was something special between the Marshal and the widow Larson. The ladies' auxiliary invited Daisy to join their quilting circle. The shopkeepers extended credit without question. Samuel, now crawling and babbling, became everyone's favorite resident. One evening in January, during a particularly fierce blizzard, Jake arrived at their door looking half frozen. "Jake Bennett, what were you thinking?" Daisy scolded, pulling him inside. "Your office is literally next door. Had to check the outlying farms," he explained through chattering teeth. "Make sure everyone had enough supplies." Daisy shook her head, helping him out of his frozen coat. "You'll catch your death. Sit by the fire while I make you some hot coffee." As she turned to go to the kitchen, Jake caught her hand. "Actually, there's another reason I braved the storm." From his pocket, he pulled a small wooden box. Daisy's breath caught. "I know it's only been a few months," he said, his voice earnest, "but I've never been more certain of anything. I love you, Daisy Larson. I love Samuel as if he were my own son. And if you'll have me, I'd like to spend the rest of my days proving that love." Tears welled in Daisy's eyes as Jake opened the box to reveal a simple gold band with a small pearl. "It was my mother's," he explained. "She'd want you to have it." Daisy could barely speak through her emotion. Jake eyed from his basket near the fire. Samuel chose that moment to pull himself up and take his very first unsteady steps right toward Jake. "Pa," he said clearly, reaching pudgy hands toward the Marshal. Jake's eyes widened in astonishment, then filled with tears. He scooped Samuel up, holding him close. "Did you hear that?" he whispered to Daisy. "He called me Pa." It was a sign, Daisy thought, a blessing from the universe. "Yes to your question," she said, wiping away happy tears. "Yes, with all my heart." They were married in the town church the following Sunday, a simple ceremony attended by what seemed like the entire town. Samuel, dressed in his best clothes, sat contentedly in Mrs. Peterson's lap, occasionally calling out "Pa" to everyone's delight. Spring arrived with new beginnings. The snow melted, revealing green shoots pushing through the earth. Daisy discovered she was expecting a child, news that brought Jake to his knees with joy when she told him. When it came time to return to the homestead, they decided to build anew. The Petersons would stay on as partners, working a portion of the land in exchange for a share of the crops. Jake and Daisy would build a new, larger home nearby where they would raise their growing family. The foundation was laid by early summer. Jake worked alongside the hired men, his marshal's badge still pinned to his vest. He'd kept his position, though he now had deputies who handled most of the routine matters, allowing him more time with his family. One warm evening, as the new house's frame stood outlined against the setting sun, Daisy sat on a blanket with Samuel, now a toddling 15-month-old, watching Jake secure the last beam of the day. "All done for now," Jake called down, climbing carefully from the structure. He joined them on the blanket, ruffling Samuel's dark curls. "What do you think, son? Is it a good house?" "Good house, Pa," Samuel agreed enthusiastically. Daisy leaned against Jake's shoulder, her hand resting on her slightly rounded belly. "It's more than good, it's perfect." Jake placed his hand over hers. "Are you happy, Daisy?" Truly, she thought of everything they'd been through, the loss, the struggles, the fear, and then the finding of each other, the building of something new. "Happier than I ever imagined possible," she said truthfully. As dusk settled over the Colorado territory, Samuel dozed between them, secure in the love that surrounded him. Jake kissed Daisy softly, a promise in the gentle pressure of his lips. "Remember that day I first came to check on you?" he asked. "After those men left," Daisy nodded. "How could I forget? You fixed my window." Jake smiled at the memory. Later that evening, when you were putting Samuel down, I heard you whisper to him. You said, I don't know how I'm going to do this. I can't raise him alone. Daisy's eyes widened. She hadn't known he'd heard that moment of vulnerability. I wanted so badly to tell you then, Jake continued, that you wouldn't have to, that I'd be there, but it was too soon. And now, Daisy asked, her heart full. Jake's arm tightened around her shoulders as they gazed at their half-built home, their sleeping son, the land that stretched before them, their future. Now I can finally say what I wanted to that day, he said softly. You never have to do it alone again, not ever. As the first stars appeared in the twilight sky, Daisy thought about the journey that had brought them here. From a frightened widow defending her homestead to a woman secure in love and purpose. From a grieving lawman to a father embracing a second chance. I believe you, she whispered, and sealed the promise with a kiss. 5 years later, the Bennett homestead flourished. The house Jake built now echoed with the laughter of 3 children: Samuel, now 6, and the spitting image of his stepfather, 3-year-old Emily, who had Daisy's golden curls and Jake's determined spirit, and baby Robert, named for the father Samuel would never know but would always honor. The Petersons had their own place now, though they remained close friends and partners in the expanding farm operations. Jake still wore the marshal's badge, though more ceremonially these days, having trained deputies to handle most matters while he focused on the ranch and his family. On the anniversary of their wedding, Jake and Daisy sat on the porch of their home, watching their children chase fireflies in the dusk. Samuel was teaching Emily how to cup her hands just right to catch the glowing insects without harming them, while baby Robert crawled determinedly after them on the grass. You ever think about how close we came to missing this? Jake asked, his arm around Daisy's shoulders. If those men hadn't come that day, if I hadn't been passing by. Daisy leaned into his embrace. I prefer to think it was meant to be, that somehow we would have found each other anyway. Jake smiled, the lines around his eyes deepening. At 35, he was still as handsome as the day she'd met him, though now with touches of silver at his temples. You always were the optimist, he said fondly. One of us has to be, she teased back. From the yard, Samuel's voice called out, Pa, come see. Emily caught the biggest one yet. Jake squeezed Daisy's hand before standing to join their children. Watching him kneel beside them, his face illuminated by the soft glow of the fireflies and the children's excitement, Daisy felt a wave of gratitude so intense it brought tears to her eyes. Once she had whispered to her infant son that she couldn't raise him alone. She remembered the fear, the overwhelming sense of isolation. And she remembered Jake's response months later when he finally told her he'd overheard, "Then you'll never have to again." It was a promise he had kept every day since, through hardship and joy, through all the ordinary miracles of their life together. As the stars came out in full force above the Colorado plains, Daisy joined her family in the yard, closing the circle around the dancing fireflies and the love that had found them all.